power isn't what most people think it is. We've been fed this fantasy that nice guys finish first, that being genuine and authentic is all you need to succeed. But if you look at the people who actually hold real power in this world, the CEOs, politicians, and influential figures who shape our reality, they operate by completely different rules. They understand something that Niccolò Machiavelli figured out over 500 years ago, and today we're going to break down exactly how powerful people really think using Machiavelli's timeless mental models. The first thing you need to understand about power is that it's not given, it's taken. Most people sit around waiting for someone to recognize their talent, waiting for permission to be great, waiting for their turn, but powerful people don't wait. They understand that power is a game, and like any game, it has rules, but not the rules they teach you in school or that your parents told you about being nice and playing fair. The real rules are written in blood and ambition, and they're as old as civilization itself. Machiavelli understood this when he wrote The Prince in 1513. He wasn't writing a fairy tale about how the world should work. He was documenting how it actually works. He was showing us the mental models that powerful people use, the cognitive frameworks that separate those who rule from those who are ruled. And here's the uncomfortable truth that makes people squirm. These mental models work. They've worked for centuries, and they're working right now in boardrooms, political offices, and social circles all around the world. The first mental model is what Machiavelli called the lion and the fox. He said that a prince must learn to be both a lion and a fox, the lion to frighten wolves, and the fox to recognize traps. This isn't just about leadership styles, it's about cognitive flexibility. Powerful people understand that different situations require different approaches, and they can switch between modes seamlessly. When they need to be feared, they can be intimidating. When they need to be clever, they can outmaneuver their opponents with cunning. Most people are stuck in one mode. They're either always the nice guy or always the aggressive one. But powerful people have access to the full spectrum of human behavior. Think about the most successful people you know personally or have observed. I bet if you really analyze their behavior, you'll see this pattern. They're not consistently one thing. Around subordinates, they might be commanding and decisive. Around superiors, they might be charming and deferential. Around peers, they might be competitive and strategic. They adapt their persona to extract maximum value from each interaction. This isn't being fake, this is being strategically intelligent. The second mental model is the concept of perceived versus actual virtue. Machiavelli wrote that it's more important to appear virtuous than to actually be virtuous, because people judge you based on appearances, not reality. This sounds cynical, but think about it practically. How many genuinely good people do you know who never get promoted, never get recognition, never build influence, because they're too busy actually doing good work instead of making sure people know they're doing good work? Meanwhile, how many people have you seen advance in their careers not because they're the most competent, but because they're the best at managing perceptions? Powerful people understand that reality is secondary to perception. They invest heavily in their image, their brand, their reputation. They understand that people make decisions based on incomplete information, and they make sure that the incomplete information people have about them is favorable. They control the narrative. They don't just do good work. They make sure the right people know about their good work. They don't just have good intentions. They communicate those intentions effectively. This ties directly into the third mental model, the importance of timing and opportunity. Machiavelli wrote about fortuna, fortune or luck, and how a successful prince must be ready to seize opportunities when they arise. But here's the key insight. Powerful people don't just wait for opportunities. They create conditions where opportunities are more likely to emerge, and they position themselves to be the obvious choice when those opportunities arise. They build relationships before they need them. They develop skills before they're required. They establish credibility in areas where they anticipate future growth. When everyone else is scrambling to react to changes, powerful people have already positioned themselves to benefit from those changes. They think 3 moves ahead, like chess players, considering not just what they want to happen, but what their opponents might do, what external factors might intervene, and how they can maintain advantage regardless of what unfolds. The fourth mental model is perhaps the most controversial: the strategic use of fear and love. Machiavelli famously wrote that it's better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. But this requires understanding the psychology behind both emotions. Love is unreliable. It's based on people's feelings, which change. Fear is more consistent. It's based on consequences, which are predictable. Powerful people understand that while being genuinely liked is valuable, being respected and slightly feared is often more effective for maintaining authority and getting results. This doesn't mean being a tyrant or being cruel for the sake of cruelty. It means understanding that sometimes you have to make unpopular decisions. Sometimes you have to enforce boundaries. Sometimes you have to prioritize results over feelings. Most people avoid these situations because they're uncomfortable. But powerful people lean into discomfort because they understand that temporary unpopularity is often the price of long-term success. The fifth mental model is about information asymmetry. Machiavelli understood that knowledge is power, but more specifically, that having information others don't have is a source of enormous advantage. Powerful people are obsessed with gathering intelligence, not just about their industries or their markets, but about people, motivations, hidden agendas, and future plans. They ask better questions, they listen more carefully, they pay attention to things others ignore. They understand that most people reveal far more than they realize, and they've trained themselves to pick up on subtle cues, inconsistencies, and patterns. They know who talks to whom, who has influence over whom, what people's real priorities are versus what they claim their priorities are. This isn't about being manipulative, it's about being aware. In a world where everyone else is operating on assumptions and incomplete data, the person with the best information has a massive advantage. The sixth mental model involves understanding the difference between allies, enemies, and neutrals. And more importantly, understanding that these categories are fluid. Machiavelli wrote about the importance of knowing who your real allies are versus who your temporary allies are versus who your enemies are pretending to be allies. Powerful people don't take relationships at face value. They understand that people's loyalties shift based on their interests, and they're constantly evaluating and re-evaluating where everyone stands. They build coalitions, but they don't depend on them. They help others, but they keep track of favors. They trust, but they verify. They understand that business is personal, even when people claim it isn't, and they factor emotional dynamics into their strategic calculations. They know that today's enemy might be tomorrow's ally, and today's ally might be tomorrow's competitor, so they maintain flexibility in their relationships while never revealing more than necessary about their own plans and vulnerabilities. The seventh mental model is about resource allocation and the compound effect of strategic investments. Powerful people don't just think about immediate returns. They think about how investments compound over time. They invest in relationships that might not pay off for years. They develop skills that aren't immediately relevant. They take on projects that might seem like distractions, but that position them for future opportunities. They understand that power accumulates, and they're always thinking about how to turn current resources into future resources. Money into influence, influence into access, access into opportunities, opportunities into more money and more influence. They see the interconnections that others miss, and they're patient enough to let compound interest work in their favor. The eighth mental model is perhaps the most psychologically sophisticated. They understand the difference between what people say they want and what they actually respond to. Machiavelli observed that people often claim to value honesty, integrity, and fairness, but they actually respond to confidence, decisiveness, and strength. Powerful people pay attention to revealed preferences rather than stated preferences. They notice that people say they want collaboration, but they follow clear direction. They say they want equality, but they respect hierarchy. They say they want authenticity, but they're influenced by status and presentation. This isn't about being cynical about human nature. It's about being realistic about human psychology. Powerful people work with people as they are, not as they claim to be or as they wish they were. The ninth mental model involves strategic patience versus tactical urgency. Machiavelli understood that effective leaders must be patient with long-term strategy, but urgent with tactical execution. Powerful people think in decades, but act in days. They have a clear vision of where they want to be in 10 years, but they're ruthlessly focused on what needs to happen today, this week, this month to move toward that vision. They don't get distracted by short-term fluctuations or temporary setbacks because they're focused on longer-term trajectories. But they also don't use long-term thinking as an excuse for procrastination or inaction. They understand that strategy without execution is worthless, and execution without strategy is wasteful. The 10th mental model is about managing your own psychology and emotional state. Machiavelli wrote about the importance of appearing calm and in control, even when circumstances are chaotic. Powerful people have developed sophisticated emotional regulation skills. They don't make important decisions when they're angry, afraid, or overly excited. They've learned to separate their emotional experience from their behavioral choices. This doesn't mean they don't feel emotions. It means they don't let emotions drive their decisions. They understand that other people are watching for signs of weakness, uncertainty, or loss of control, and they've trained themselves to project stability and confidence even when they're feeling anything but stable or confident internally. They also understand the strategic value of occasionally displaying controlled emotion, knowing when anger is useful, when vulnerability creates connection, when enthusiasm is motivating. They're not emotionally suppressed, they're emotionally strategic. Now here's what's fascinating about all of these mental models. They're not just about gaining power over others, they're about gaining power over yourself and your circumstances. They're about becoming more effective, more influential, more capable of creating the outcomes you want in your life. Most people are reactive. Things happen to them, and they respond. Powerful people are proactive. They create conditions where the things they want are more likely to happen. But here's the part that makes people uncomfortable. Using these mental models requires accepting that the world is more complex and morally ambiguous than we'd like it to be. It requires acknowledging that good intentions aren't enough, that fairness isn't guaranteed, that playing by the rules that make you feel good about yourself might not be the rules that get you the results you want. This doesn't mean abandoning your values or becoming ruthlessly manipulative. It means becoming more sophisticated about how you pursue your values in a complex world. It means understanding that you can be ethical and strategic at the same time. You can care about other people and also care about your own success. You can be genuine and also be aware of how your genuineness is being perceived and received. The most powerful people I've observed are not sociopaths or narcissists. They're people who have developed sophisticated models for understanding human behavior, organizational dynamics, and social systems. They use these models to create value, build influence, and achieve goals that matter to them. They're not more selfish than other people. They're more effective. If you're watching this and thinking that this all sounds too manipulative or calculating, I want you to consider something. Every interaction you have with other people involves psychology, influence, and strategy, whether you're conscious of it or not. The question isn't whether you're going to use psychological and strategic thinking. You already are. The question is whether you're going to do it consciously and skillfully, or unconsciously and ineffectively. Powerful people have simply made the choice to become conscious and skillful. They study human nature the way athletes study their sport. They practice influence the way musicians practice their instruments. They treat strategic thinking as a core life skill, not as something optional or morally questionable. And here's what I've noticed. When you start applying these mental models in your own life, you do not become less authentic. You become more effective at expressing your authenticity in ways that create the results you want. You don't become less caring. You become better at caring for people in ways that actually help them and that they actually appreciate. You don't become less ethical. You become more sophisticated about how to be ethical in complex situations. The people who criticize these ideas are usually the same people who complain about feeling powerless in their own lives, who feel like they're always being taken advantage of, who feel like the system is rigged against them. And they're not wrong. The system often is rigged. But the solution isn't to ignore how the system works and hope it changes. The solution is to understand how it works and learn to navigate it effectively while working to improve it. Machiavelli wasn't advocating for a world where might makes right. He was describing the world as it actually exists and providing tools for navigating it successfully. These mental models aren't about becoming a bad person. They're about becoming a more effective person. They're about understanding reality clearly enough to change it in the direction you want it to go. So here's my challenge for you. Pick one of these mental models and start paying attention to how it shows up in your life over the next week. Notice when you see the lion and fox dynamic in your workplace. Notice when you see the difference between perceived and actual virtue in your social circles. Notice when you see the strategic use of timing and opportunity in your industry. Start seeing the matrix of power and influence that surrounds you every day. And then ask yourself, how can you use these insights to become more effective at creating the outcomes you want while staying true to your values? How can you become more strategic without becoming less authentic? How can you build more influence while serving more people? The goal isn't to become Machiavellian in the popular sense of that word, manipulative and ruthless. The goal is to become Machiavellian in the original sense, clear-eyed about reality, strategic about your choices, and effective at creating the changes you want to see in the world. If this video has challenged your thinking about power and influence, if it's given you new frameworks for understanding the successful people around you, if it's sparked ideas about how you might approach your own goals differently, then hit that like button right now. Your engagement tells me that this kind of deep psychological and strategic analysis is valuable to you, and it helps me know to create more content like this. And make sure you subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, because we're going to continue exploring the psychology of high performers, the mental models of successful people, and the strategies that actually work in the real world. We don't just talk about motivation and positive thinking here. We dig into the sophisticated, psychological and strategic tools that separate people who dream about success from people who actually achieve it. But here's what I really want to know. As you've been listening to this, have you recognized these patterns in your own life? Have you seen these mental models in action in your workplace, your social circles, your family dynamics? Have you noticed yourself using some of these strategies unconsciously? Or have you been avoiding them because they felt too calculating? Drop a comment below and let me know which of these mental models resonated most with you, and share a story about when you've seen these dynamics play out in your own experience. I read every comment, and your insights often spark ideas for future videos. Plus, I'm genuinely curious about how these concepts land with different people and how they apply across different industries, cultures, and life situations. Your perspective matters, and sharing your experience helps create a community of people who are committed to understanding reality clearly and navigating it effectively. Now, let me share something that most people never realize about these mental models. They're not just individual tools, they work together as a complete system. The most powerful people don't just use one or two of these approaches, they integrate all of them into a comprehensive worldview that informs every decision they make. They see the connections between information gathering and relationship building, between timing and resource allocation, between perception management and strategic patience. This integrated approach is what creates exponential results rather than linear improvements. Think about someone like Steve Jobs, who masterfully combined the lion and fox approach. He could be intimidatingly demanding in meetings, but incredibly charming in public presentations. He understood the power of perception management, creating an almost mythical personal brand that extended far beyond Apple's products. He was obsessed with information and detail, famously involving himself in decisions that other CEOs would delegate. He built strategic relationships throughout Silicon Valley while maintaining an air of exclusivity and scarcity around his attention and approval. Or consider someone like Oprah Winfrey, who built her empire by understanding that people respond more to how you make them feel than to what you actually say. She mastered the art of appearing vulnerable and authentic while maintaining strict control over her image and message. She created information asymmetry by getting people to reveal deeply personal stories while keeping her own private life largely mysterious. She built a network of relationships that spans entertainment, politics, business, and philanthropy, and she's maintained those relationships for decades through consistent value creation and strategic reciprocity. These aren't accidents or natural talents. These are learnable skills based on understanding human psychology and social dynamics. But here's what separates the people who successfully implement these models from those who don't. They practice them consistently until they become automatic. They don't just understand these concepts intellectually, they embody them behaviorally. Most people learn something new and then forget to apply it when the pressure is on. They read about strategic thinking, but make impulsive decisions when emotions are high. They understand the importance of perception management, but forget to consider how their words and actions will be interpreted by others. They know they should build relationships before they need them, but only reach out to people when they want something. Powerful people have developed what psychologists call automaticity. Their strategic thinking has become so habitual that they don't have to consciously remember to apply these mental models. They've trained themselves to automatically ask questions like, how will this decision be perceived by different stakeholders? What information am I missing? What are the second and third order consequences of this action? Who needs to be involved or informed? What's the optimal timing for this move? How does this serve my long-term strategy? This level of integration requires what Machiavelli called virtù, not virtue in the moral sense, but excellence in execution. The ability to do whatever the situation requires with skill and effectiveness. It's the difference between knowing what to do and actually doing it consistently, especially when it's difficult or uncomfortable. And here's something crucial that most people miss. Developing these capabilities actually makes you a better person to be around, not a worse one. When you become more strategically intelligent, you become more reliable because people can predict that you'll make good decisions. When you become better at managing perceptions, you become clearer in your communication. When you develop emotional regulation skills, you become more stable and trustworthy in relationships. The people who are suspicious of strategic thinking often confuse it with manipulation, but there's a fundamental difference. Manipulation involves deceiving people to get them to act against their own interests. Strategic thinking involves understanding people well enough to create genuine value for them while also advancing your own goals. It's the difference between taking advantage of people and creating situations where everyone wins. In fact, I would argue that if you care about making a positive impact in the world, you have a responsibility to develop these skills. If you want to create change, build something meaningful, or help other people, you need to understand how influence actually works. Good intentions without strategic intelligence often lead to frustration and failure. You end up like those well-meaning people who have great ideas, but can never get anyone to listen to them, who work incredibly hard, but never seem to get ahead, who care deeply about important causes, but can't figure out how to create the changes they want to see. The world needs more good people who understand power, not fewer. It needs more ethical people who are also effective people. It needs more caring people who are also strategic people. The alternative, leaving power to people who do not share your values, is not actually a moral choice. It's an abdication of responsibility. If this video has given you a new perspective on boundaries, relationships, or leadership, smash that like button to help more people discover these ideas. The YouTube algorithm needs to know that this kind of content resonates with people, because understanding these principles isn't just about personal success. It's about creating a world where people treat each other with genuine respect rather than just surface-level niceness. And if you want to continue exploring the psychology of influence, power dynamics, and effective decision-making, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because we dive deep into these topics regularly. This isn't content for people who want easy answers or comfortable truths. This is for people who are ready to do the hard work of understanding how the world really works and how to navigate it with both strength and integrity. The comments section is where these ideas really come alive, so don't just watch and leave. Share your thoughts, your experiences, your questions, your disagreements. Tell me about a time when being too nice backfired on you. Tell me about a boundary you need to set, but you're scared to enforce. Tell me about a difficult conversation you've been avoiding. Tell me about a relationship where you've realized you're giving way more than you're receiving. Your perspective and experiences can help other viewers understand these concepts better and realize they're not alone in struggling with these challenges. And who knows, your comment might be exactly what someone else needs to read to finally find the courage to make the changes they know they need to make in their own lives. Remember, strategic ruthlessness isn't about becoming someone you're not. It's about becoming who you really are underneath all the people-pleasing and conflict avoidance. It's about aligning your actions with your deepest values, even when it's uncomfortable. It's about caring enough to do what's right, not just what's easy. And it's about understanding that in a world full of complexity and competing interests, good outcomes often require the courage to make choices that aren't immediately popular or understood. So what's it going to be? Are you going to keep choosing the easy path of avoiding difficult decisions and wondering why people don't respect you the way you respect them? Or are you ready to develop the psychological tools that will make you truly effective at creating positive change in your life and in the lives of the people around you? The choice, as Machiavelli understood, is always yours. But now you understand what that choice really means and why it matters so much for everything you want to accomplish in your relationships, your career, and your life. But developing these capabilities requires confronting some uncomfortable truths about yourself and about the world. You have to acknowledge that you've probably been naive about certain things. You have to admit that some of your previous approaches have not been as effective as you thought they were. You have to accept that the world doesn't always reward the behaviors you were taught to value, and that sometimes you need to adapt your approach to achieve the outcomes you care about. This can be psychologically challenging because it means letting go of certain illusions about how the world works. It means accepting that life is more complex and ambiguous than the simple moral frameworks we learned as children. It means developing tolerance for uncertainty, nuance, and contradiction. But here's what I've found. The people who successfully make this transition don't become cynical or manipulative. They become more compassionate and more effective at helping others. They develop what you might call strategic empathy. They understand people well enough to serve them better. They become more patient with human nature's complexities and contradictions. They stop expecting people to be perfect and start working with people as they actually are. They also become more self-aware about their own motivations, biases, and limitations. When you start studying influence and power systematically, you inevitably start noticing your own patterns, your own psychological blind spots, your own strategic mistakes. This self-knowledge makes you more humble and more effective simultaneously. The journey of developing these mental models is really a journey of growing up psychologically. It's about moving from a childlike view of the world, where everything should be simple and fair, to a more mature view where you understand complexity and take responsibility for navigating it skillfully. It's about becoming someone who can handle nuance, ambiguity, and competing priorities without becoming paralyzed or cynical. And the most beautiful part is that as you develop these capabilities, you start attracting other people who are also operating at this level. You build relationships with people who are strategic and ethical, ambitious and caring, effective and authentic. You create a network of people who understand that you can pursue your own interests while also serving others, that you can be successful while also being a good person. So don't just watch and disappear. Engage with this content. Engage with this community. And let's continue this conversation about what it really takes to build influence, create impact, and achieve meaningful success in a complex world. The comments section is where the real learning happens, so I'll see you down there.